My name is Keva. I'm 42 years old. I was married to Bevis for 18 years, a man I once loved with all my trust. Bevis was never the romantic or sweet type. He was principled, decisive, worked in finance, and always maintained a successful appearance. When we first got married, I thought that stability would be my anchor. But as time went on, I realized that in that relationship, my emotions felt like a minor detail, insignificant and easily overlooked. Bevis never yelled, never cursed, and never laid a hand on me. But he wore me down in another way, through a slow-burning coldness. Silent dinners, sitting across from each other with nothing to say. Holidays filled with work emails, laptops, and midnight phone calls. Whenever I suggested something, Bevis would just smile slightly, the smile of someone certain he was right, and say I was just being too sensitive. I tried to hold that marriage together. There were times I blamed myself, thinking I expected too much. But one day I accidentally saw some messages on his phone, brief, clear, and full of implication. I didn't make a scene. I quietly confirmed it, and it didn't take long to find out that the name Stella, a woman nearly 10 years younger than me, had been in his life for months before I ever noticed. I didn't scream, didn't confront the other woman, didn't beg or plead. One afternoon in June, I sat across from Bevis in our living room and placed the divorce papers on the table. He looked at me, slightly surprised, then silently nodded. We divided the assets by the book. Bevis kept the main house, the one I had spent years decorating, every corner of it. I took the smaller share, just enough to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. When I moved out, I only brought a few suitcases, a few paintings I had made myself, and a teapot set my mother left me. In the early days after the divorce, I lived a rather quiet life. My new apartment was on the 3rd floor, no elevator, but it had a small balcony overlooking a patch of pine trees. Every morning I brewed a pot of coffee, sat outside listening to the birds, and tried to get used to no longer having someone sitting across from me at the table. I didn't rise up strong right away like people often say. Everything came slowly. Some days I didn't even leave the house, just curled up in a blanket listening to old songs and thinking about the times we used to dance in the living room. But then I started taking walks in the evenings. I joined a yoga class and a beginner's painting course. To my surprise, I grew attached to it. The brushes and watercolors gave me a gentle feeling that was hard to describe. I painted walls, flower vases, the shadows of trees on concrete, the little things I had never noticed before. Painting slowed me down. And in that slowness I began to listen to myself. One October afternoon at our class's art exhibition, I happened to meet Egan. He stood for quite a while in front of a painting I made, a half-closed door in a misty garden. When I came over to straighten the title card on the frame, he looked at me and said, "I once saw a door like this in a dream." Egan was soft-spoken, quiet, and had the kind of eyes that looked like they had seen many losses. I later learned that his wife had died of cancer 6 years earlier. He used to be an architect, lived alone, liked long walks and reading philosophy. After that day he often stopped by our painting class and invited me for tea. Over time those afternoon teas became a routine. And from that routine I realized I no longer avoided someone's gaze the way I used to. Egan didn't ask much about the past. I don't know exactly when I started feeling lighter. Maybe it was the first time I painted him. One spring morning when he was sitting by the window, sunlight spilling over his shoulder as he read. Or maybe it was that evening we cooked dinner together and he laughed when I burned the omelette. All I know is the feeling of being dismissed and abandoned, that had once taken root in me, had begun to fade, making space for something else. One morning in late April I opened the mailbox as usual. Among the bills and flyers was a thick ivory envelope, my name written in a familiar cursive. I picked it up and froze for a moment when I saw the sender. Bevis Langford. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table. It took a long while before I opened it. The wedding invitation fit neatly in my hand, the scent of fresh ink still lingering. It was elegantly designed, thick paper, metallic trim, embossed lettering. "We are pleased to announce the marriage of Bevis Langford and Stella Marlin, to be held on May 28. I read it a second time, then a third. Not to confirm the truth, but to figure out what exactly had risen inside me. Anger? No. Pain? Not quite. Maybe just a dull sinking feeling, like walking past an old house and seeing it painted a different color. I sat by the window for a long time, the card resting on the table. Egan came by, carrying a bouquet of yellow tulips and some apple-filled waffles. Seeing me quiet, he tilted his head and gently asked, "Are you okay?" I handed him the invitation. Egan read it once and set it down without a comment. He only asked, "Do you want to go?" I looked at him. After a moment I nodded, "I think I do." We didn't talk about it further right then. But a few days later, Egan sent me a link to a dress. Then he quietly went with me to an old tailor shop I used to love, patiently reading a book while I tried on dresses. I chose an olive green dress, loose-fitting with a V-neck, elegant but comfortable. I thought long and hard about the wedding gift. After many nights I decided to paint something myself. A large canvas. Not to send a message. Not to retaliate. I just wanted to say something I had never had the courage to express during nearly 20 years together. The painting showed a woman standing before an old wooden door. In her hand she held a silver key. Beyond the door was a warm light, meadows, blue skies, and a small path leading to the horizon. In the lower corner of the frame I wrote in small handwriting, "Sometimes the greatest gift someone ever gave you was when they walked away." I wrapped the painting in soft tissue paper, with a plain white card bearing only their names. Nothing more. I didn't know what Bevis would think. I didn't need to. The only thing I knew for sure, I was no longer the woman who forgot who she was just to stay in a loveless relationship. I spent nearly 2 weeks completing the painting. Some nights I sat for hours at the easel, adjusting a tree's shadow, a patch of sunlight, or simply the quiet in the woman's gaze. The woman, my subject, didn't look exactly like me. But her back was familiar, her hair tied low, and she wore the same long gray coat I used to wear every fall. I hadn't meant to paint myself, but somehow my feelings found their way into every brushstroke. Egan didn't interfere. He'd stop by with a cup of warm tea or sit quietly on the sofa reading, occasionally glancing up and smiling. Once he said, "I've never seen a painting so gentle and yet so heavy." I packed the painting into a custom wooden box, lined with beige silk and sealed with red wax. No ribbons, no handwritten notes, just plain the way I had always wished to be treated. Simple but kind. The wedding took place on a Saturday morning, at a luxurious hotel on the edge of the city. The parking lot was packed. Guests were greeted with white wine and elaborately handwritten signs. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation. I stepped out of the car with Egan. He draped a short wool coat over my shoulders, gently touching my arm when he noticed my fingers tense. We entered the banquet hall just as the ceremony was about to begin. Bevis stood at the front, dressed in a charcoal gray tailored suit. He didn't look much different. Same face, same eyes, only more confident now, colder. Stella wore a mermaid-style wedding gown, her hair in an elegant bun, lips painted deep red. She looked at me as I passed the third row, a quick glance, neither warm nor mocking, just surprised. Perhaps they hadn't expected me to come. And certainly not with another man. I placed the gift neatly on the wedding table, lined up between luxurious packages wrapped in shimmering ribbons. Among the expensive gifts, the simple wooden box seemed almost out of place, and because of that it stood out even more. The reception went on with elegance and decorum. I didn't talk much. Egan occasionally told small stories, just enough to make me smile quietly. A few people recognized me, came over to say hello, and I greeted them politely. I didn't need to prove how okay I was. My presence alone, as the woman I had become, was the clearest answer of all. About half an hour later I saw Bevis walk past the gift table. He stopped and read the label on the box. His hand brushed over the wooden lid, his gaze pausing for a moment. I don't know if he opened it then. Probably not. Maybe he waited until after the party in a quiet room. But I knew for certain, when he saw the painting he would understand. No one needed to explain. No caption was necessary. Just one message: I had stepped out of that darkness and I wasn't looking back. The wedding reception was held in a grand hall with high ceilings and warm golden lighting. Round tables draped in white cloth, decorated with orchids and scented candles. Gentle music, soft clinking of glasses. Everything arranged precisely the way Bevis liked it. Not flashy but impressive enough to draw admiration. Egan and I were seated at table 4 near the center. Some old acquaintances looked my way. Some smiled, others looked away. Maybe they didn't know how to react. I used to be Mrs. Langford. Now I was just Keva, a woman who had once been here and quietly disappeared. Bevis stepped up to give a speech after the cake-cutting ceremony. Holding the microphone, he spoke in his usual calm tone, thanking everyone, complimenting the bride, acknowledging both sets of parents and thanking old friends who came back to witness this new beginning. I didn't feel anything in particular. No sadness. No bitterness. Just a listener, no longer connected. Egan gently took my hand under the table. His presence didn't need words, just a touch, a knowing look, and that was enough. When the main dinner began, staff started moving gifts to a side table, where they would be sorted before being sent to the couple's suite. I wasn't paying attention until a small stir arose nearby. A few guests gathered around the wooden box. My gift. I heard a woman say, "Is that a real painting? Who gave it?" Then another speaking softly. "I think it's the groom's ex-wife." I stayed seated. I didn't go over. Didn't explain anything. But Bevis's gaze across the room found me. He was standing in the hallway near the gift room, Stella beside him, chatting with friends. Bevis didn't take his eyes off the box, then walked over and lifted the lid. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew that look. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't anger. It was a stillness, the kind that comes when someone confronts something deeper than they expected. Maybe he never thought I was capable of something like that. Stella turned, looked at Bevis, then followed his eyes toward the painting. She didn't say anything, but I saw the confusion rise on her face. Maybe she was wondering how a betrayed woman could be this calm. And maybe realizing there were spaces she would never be able to fill. A middle-aged man, likely an old business acquaintance of Bevis, stopped by my table, pointing at the painting and said, "Did you paint that? It's incredible. So much depth." I just smiled gently, thanked him. Said nothing more. When we left the hall, Egan opened the car door for me, his hand resting warmly on my back. On the drive home, he didn't ask how I felt. He simply played soft jazz, my hand resting in his the whole way. The night breeze drifted through the window, carrying the scent of early-season milk flowers. I leaned back into the seat and closed my eyes. There were no more stones in my chest to unburden. Only the quiet of someone who had stepped out of the past, and knew with certainty she no longer needed to look back. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. The sun had just risen over the rooftops across the street, casting early light across the wooden floor, slipping through the sheer curtain I hadn't bothered to draw. I stepped onto the balcony with a hot cup of Earl Grey, quietly gazing at the little garden below. The early summer maple was already in full leaf, its green canopy shading part of the porch like a natural arch. I turned on the radio and chose a gentle classical music station. A piano concerto began to play. It reminded me of a rainy afternoon long ago, when I sat in my old house writing diary entries no one would ever read. But now I no longer needed to write. Everything I needed was already in the life I was living. Egan stopped by mid-morning. He brought raspberry waffles and a few dried lavender sprigs tied with twine. We had breakfast in the kitchen. Neither of us mentioned the wedding. But then he placed his hand on the table, looked at me and said, "Are you feeling better?" I nodded. I think I've never felt this light before. That afternoon I rehung a few paintings around the house. Some were old, but I kept them because they held parts of my life. The painting I gave Bevis, the copy I kept, I framed and placed in my study. Not as a reminder but as a milestone. A chapter had closed and I had written it by my own hand. I enrolled in an advanced painting class. I joined a community gardening group. Every Tuesday afternoon, Egan and I took walks around the lake talking about little things. Dinner, a new book, a flower I wanted to grow. No drama, no peaks, but I felt my life being rewoven thread by thread, steady and soft. One day, sitting on the porch, I scribbled a few lines into my old journal, the one where I used to write my most uncertain thoughts. Not everyone who leaves is a loss. Some leave to give back the space we forgot we ever had. The space of freedom, of laughter, and of new days. I closed the journal and took a deep breath. Outside, the sun was setting slowly. The wind passed through the trees, carrying the scent of warm grass and fresh wood. Movie camera, if you've ever walked out of an old life and found yourself again, leave a comment or share your story. Red Heart, don't forget to like, share and follow the channel for more inspiring healing journeys like this one.